The nurse who saved a millionaire, a destiny forged in rain. "Please help me," the man murmured, his voice ragged as blood stained his white shirt. Eleanor Vance quickly knelt on the wet pavement, the rain drenching her turquoise scrubs as she examined the stranger's wounds. Her expert hands moved with precision over the cuts and bruises. "Calm down. I'm here," she told him firmly, yet gently. "I'm a nurse. Can you tell me what happened?" The man's eyes, a deep hazel, looked at her with a mix of pain and gratitude before closing again. "They attacked me," was all he managed to say before losing consciousness. "I need help!" Eleanor shouted towards the service entrance of St. Peter's Hospital. "Bring a gurney, quickly!" The storm raged over London that October night. Eleanor Vance had been about to finish her second consecutive shift when she decided to step out for some fresh air through the back door of the hospital. She never imagined she would find an injured man, collapsed in the torrential rain. Minutes later, the stranger was being treated in the emergency room, while Eleanor helped stabilize him. He carried no identification, only a very expensive watch and a blood-stained business card in his pocket. "Saving the world again, Ellie?" Danielle Brooks, her colleague and friend, commented as they monitored the patient's vital signs. "You should have left an hour ago and let him bleed out at the entrance. I couldn't do that," Eleanor replied, adjusting the IV drip. "You have too big a heart. That's why you end up exhausted." Eleanor smiled faintly. At 28, she carried the weight of supporting her grandmother, Martha, and paying for her younger brother, Matthew's, university education. Her own dreams of opening a community clinic had taken a back seat. "Someone has to take care of others, Danny. You can't save everyone, Eleanor," Danielle insisted, looking worried. Dr. Alexander Price entered the emergency room at that moment. His face tensed slightly when he saw Eleanor. They had ended their relationship 6 months ago, but the atmosphere between them remained awkward. "Nurse Vance, I thought you had left," he said formally as he examined the patient. "I found this man at the back entrance, doctor," she replied, equally formal. "He has multiple lacerations, contusions on his torso, and possible fractured ribs." Alexander examined the unconscious man with a frown. "Looks like a pretty serious beating. Any identification?" "None," Eleanor replied. "Only this." She showed him the stained business card, where Montero Khan was barely legible, and a watch that even she, with her limited knowledge of luxury items, recognized as extremely expensive. "Interesting," Alexander murmured, observing the man's quality clothing despite being stained and torn. "Alert security and prepare him for X-rays. He might have internal injuries." When the doctor walked away, Eleanor remained by the mysterious patient for a moment longer. There was something vaguely familiar about his face, though she was sure she had never seen him before. 3 hours later than planned, Eleanor finally left the hospital. The rain had subsided, but the streets gleamed wet under the streetlights. As she waited for the bus, she couldn't stop thinking about the injured man. Who was he? Why had he been attacked? The next day, Eleanor arrived early for her shift. Before starting her usual rounds, she went to the room where the stranger had been transferred. To her surprise, he was awake, looking out the window with a confused expression. Noticing her presence, the man turned his head. "Good morning," Eleanor greeted with a smile. "I'm Eleanor Vance, the nurse who found you last night. How do you feel?" "Sore," he replied hoarsely, with a faint smile. "But better than yesterday, thanks to you." Eleanor noticed his wounds were healing well. The bruises on his face were starting to fade, revealing attractive, well-defined features. "The doctors say you'll recover physically soon," she commented as she checked his vital signs. "Your memory, that might take longer." The man observed her intently. There was something about the way she moved, her natural kindness, that he found comforting amidst the confusion dominating his mind. Are you always so attentive with all your patients? Eleanor smiled as she made a note in his chart. I try to be. My grandmother always says medicine heals the body, but compassion heals the soul. Your grandmother seems very wise, he replied, looking out the window. I wonder if I have family worried about me. It's strange not knowing who you are, as if I were a ghost. The vulnerability on his face touched Eleanor. She sat for a moment on the edge of the bed. You're not a ghost, sir. You're a real person with a story that's temporarily hidden. Your memory will return. And if it doesn't, what if the person I was didn't deserve to be remembered? The question hung in the air as Danielle poked her head through the door. Ellie, they need you in room 3. Emergency. I have to go, Eleanor said, standing up, but I'll be back later. I'll be here, the man joked, gesturing to the room. Not like I have other plans. Over the next few days, Eleanor began spending more time with him than her job strictly required. Something about him piqued her curiosity. For a man without memories, he knew surprisingly much about architecture, history, and art. During their chats, Eleanor found herself sharing details of her life that she rarely mentioned to others. So you want to open a community clinic? The man asked one afternoon, as Eleanor helped him with physiotherapy exercises. It's been my dream since I was a little girl, she confessed. My hometown doesn't have adequate medical services. People have to travel hours to receive basic care. It's a noble dream, but an expensive one, Eleanor added with a resigned smile. For now, my priority is for my brother Matthew to finish university. He'll be a great engineer. And your parents? Eleanor's expression darkened. My father died in a construction accident when I was 8. My mother left us shortly after. My grandmother, Martha, raised Matthew and me. The man instinctively took her hand. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. The contact between their hands produced an electric current that they both felt. Eleanor blushed slightly and pulled her hand away, pretending to check the vital signs monitor. It was a long time ago, she replied, changing the subject. Have you remembered anything new today? The man frowned. Fragments. An argument in a boardroom. Documents that showed something alarming and the feeling of being followed. But everything's blurry, like images behind a fogged glass. From the doorway, Alexander watched the scene with a grim expression. He had noticed the growing closeness between Eleanor and the mysterious patient, and he didn't like it. Something about the whole situation didn't add up. That night, as Eleanor had dinner with Danielle in the hospital cafeteria, the news on the television showed an elegant, serious-looking man. As a representative of the Sterling Group, I appeal to anyone with information about my cousin Michael Sterling's whereabouts, Richard Sterling said into the microphones. His disappearance has deeply affected our family and company. Eleanor barely paid attention to the news, focused on her conversation with Danielle. You're getting too involved with the amnesiac patient, her friend warned her. Be careful, Ellie. We don't know anything about him. He's just a vulnerable man who needs help, Eleanor replied. Besides, what's wrong with being kind? It's not just kindness I see between you two. Danielle arched an eyebrow. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. Alexander is fuming. Alexander and I broke up months ago. He has no right to monitor who I talk to. You know how he is. And to be honest, I'm worried this Martin might turn out to be a criminal, or worse. Eleanor sighed, tired of justifying herself. I trust my instincts, Danny. He's not a bad person, just someone lost. The next day, Alexander informed them that the man, still referred to as Martin, was fit to be discharged. His physical wounds had healed sufficiently, though the amnesia persisted. And where am I supposed to go? The man asked when Eleanor gave him the news. I don't even know who I am, or where I live, or if I have money, or a job. Eleanor bit her lower lip, hesitating for a moment before making an impulsive decision. You could stay temporarily at my grandmother's house. We have a small guest room." Seeing the surprise on his face, she quickly added, "Just until you recover your memory, or we find a clue about your identity." "Would you do that for me? For a stranger?" "My grandmother always says kindness returns tenfold," Eleanor replied with a smile. "Besides, something tells me I can trust you." When she informed Danielle of her decision, her friend looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Are you crazy? Taking a stranger to live with your grandmother and brother? This surpasses all your savior impulses." "It's only temporary, Danny. I can't leave him on the street. Your kindness is going to get you into trouble one of these days." Danielle sighed. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Alexander reacted even worse when he found out. He found Eleanor in the hallway and confronted her with evident concern. "I've checked all the missing persons records," he told her in a low voice. "Nothing matches our mysterious patient. Don't you find that suspicious?" "What are you implying, Alexander?" "That maybe he doesn't want to be found. Maybe he's faking the amnesia." Eleanor looked at him indignantly. "Why would he do that?" "I don't know, Eleanor. That's why I'm worried about you taking him home. What if he's dangerous?" "I trust my instincts," she replied firmly, "and my instincts tell me he's not a threat." "Your instincts and your overly soft heart," Alexander retorted. "Be careful, please. I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to you." Despite the warnings, that afternoon Eleanor helped the man, still Martin, settle into her grandmother's modest but cozy house in Hampstead. Martha, a 70-year-old woman with more energy than many young people, received the stranger with surprising warmth. "Any friend of my granddaughter is welcome," she declared, serving freshly brewed tea. "Besides, this house needs a male presence. My grandson Matthew is always cooped up with his books." The man looked around, visibly moved by the hospitality. "I don't know how to thank you for this," he said sincerely. "I promise not to be a burden and to help in any way I can." Eleanor observed the scene with a strange sense of familiarity, as if the man had always belonged in that space. However, in the back of her mind, a small voice reminded her that this arrangement was temporary. As soon as he recovered his memory, he would return to his real life, a life that, judging by his watch and manners, probably differed greatly from Eleanor Vance's humble world. The man's transition to life in the Vance household was surprisingly smooth, as if a part of him recognized this simple but warm environment as something familiar. "I've never seen anyone enjoy my homemade scones as much as you do," Martha commented, as she watched him savor the sweet bread she had just baked. "They're just delicious, madam," he replied with genuine enthusiasm. "They taste like home." The word hung in the air. How could he know what home tasted like if he couldn't remember his own? Eleanor, making tea in the small kitchen, noticed the shadow that crossed the man's face. "Grandma, you should teach him how you make the scones. He has good hands for cooking." "Excellent idea," Martha exclaimed. "A man who knows how to cook will never go hungry or depend on anyone." Thus began a strangely comfortable routine. In the mornings, while Eleanor worked at the hospital, the man helped Martha with household chores and learned her traditional recipes. In the afternoons, he sometimes accompanied Eleanor for walks through Hampstead's colorful alleys. "This neighborhood is fascinating," he commented during one of their strolls. "The colonial architecture mixed with modern elements creates a perfect balance between tradition and functionality." Eleanor looked at him curiously. "You seem to know a lot about architecture." The man stopped, surprised by his own words. "It's strange, isn't it? I can recognize architectural styles, but I don't remember where I learned them." "Perhaps you're an architect," Eleanor suggested. "Or a builder, or a professor." He sighed. "It's frustrating, like trying to catch water with your hands." Eleanor took his arm naturally. "Give it time. You're starting to have more flashbacks, aren't you?" It was true. Memory fragments appeared more frequently. A luxurious office with a city view, a heated argument with a man who resembled him, documents that showed irregularities in building structures, and always the feeling of being in danger, of being watched. The only one who didn't seem delighted with the man's presence was Matthew, Eleanor's younger brother. The 22-year-old observed the guest with obvious suspicion. "Don't you find it strange that after almost 2 weeks no one has looked for him?" he commented to his sister one night. "If he were someone important, his photo would be everywhere." "Matthew, don't be rude," Eleanor scolded him. "He might hear you." "I'm just saying we should be careful," the young man insisted. "We don't know anything about him." However, Matthew's attitude changed radically one afternoon when he was struggling with a complex civil engineering problem for his university thesis. "This makes no sense," he grumbled, looking at his notes on the dining table. "The structural load calculations don't match the proposed design." The man, passing by, took a casual glance at the drawings. "The problem is in the weight distribution," he commented, pointing to a spot on the blueprints. "If you reinforce this column and redistribute the load to these points, the structure will be more stable." Matthew looked at him, dumbfounded. "How do you know that?" The man seemed as surprised as he was. "I don't know. I just see it clearly." From that day on, Matthew began to seek out the man to discuss his university projects, and an unexpected friendship blossomed between them. Eleanor observed these changes in her family life with a mixture of joy and concern. The man had integrated perfectly, like a puzzle piece that fit perfectly. But every day that passed, she noticed more details suggesting he came from a very different world than hers. The way he instinctively straightened up when the phone rang, as if expecting someone to hand him the receiver. How he automatically reached for a watch on his bare wrist. The way he always tried to pay when they passed street vendors, searching for a wallet he didn't have. One afternoon, as they walked through the historic district, they passed by an electronics store, where a television was showing a report on the ongoing search for missing businessman Michael Sterling. The man froze in front of the screen, his face pale, as if he had seen a ghost. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked, worried. "That man," he murmured, pointing to Richard Sterling, who was giving statements to the press. "I know him." "Do you remember him?" "Not exactly, but I know he's dangerous." The man rubbed his temples, visibly affected. "I feel like I need to remember something important about him. Something bad." Eleanor took his arm and gently led him away from the store. "Let's go home. Maybe after resting, the memories will be clearer." That night, the man had nightmares. Eleanor heard him scream and rush to his room, finding him sitting up in bed, drenched in cold sweat. "The blueprints," he exclaimed when he saw her. "They altered the blueprints to save costs. 3 workers died because the beams couldn't support the weight." Eleanor sat beside him and took his trembling hands. "What blueprints? What are you talking about?" "I don't know for sure," he replied, frustrated. "But I feel like I discovered something terrible, something I had to expose, and that's why they attacked me." Eleanor stayed with him until he calmed down. As she watched him fall back asleep, an uncomfortable feeling grew inside her. What if Alexander was right? What if he was involved in something dangerous? The next day, when she arrived at the hospital, Alexander was waiting for her with a serious expression. "We need to talk," he said, leading her to an empty office. "I've been investigating our mysterious patient on my own." "Why would you do that?" Eleanor asked, annoyed by the intrusion. "Because I care about you," Alexander replied, showing her his tablet. "Look at this." On the screen was an article with a photograph of Michael Sterling, heir to Britain's largest construction empire. He had disappeared on the exact same dates Eleanor had found the man. The resemblance was undeniable. "This doesn't prove anything," Eleanor said, though her voice trembled slightly. "There's more," Alexander continued. "Before his disappearance, Michael Sterling was investigating corrupt practices within his own company. Specifically, alterations to structural designs that caused a building to collapse and the death of 3 workers. The man's words during his nightmare resonated in Eleanor's mind. Why are you showing me this? Because you're hosting one of the richest men in the UK in your home, Eleanor. A man who could be in grave danger. Eleanor returned home early that day, her mind a whirlwind of doubts and worries. She needed to talk to the man, confront him with what she had discovered. But upon arriving, Martha greeted her with a confused expression. He left a few hours ago. He was very upset after seeing something on television. He left this note for you. With trembling hands, Eleanor unfolded the paper. Eleanor, I've remembered who I am. I can't involve you all in my problems anymore. Thank you for saving me, not just in the rain that night, but for giving me back the humanity I had almost forgotten. Forgive me for not saying goodbye. Michael! Eleanor rushed to the television and turned on the news channel. There, on the screen, was the face of Michael Sterling, a face identical to the man who had shared her home for the past few weeks. Michael, she murmured, feeling a mix of betrayal and concern. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Michael Sterling observed the city from the window of his luxurious penthouse. It had been a week since he recovered his identity and returned to his world of privilege, but he felt lonelier than ever. The contrast was overwhelming. From the simple but laughter-filled table at Martha's house, to solitary dinners served by uniformed staff, from sincere conversations with Eleanor's and Matthew, to calculated meetings with lawyers and executives. Mr. Sterling, your cousin Richard wants to see you, his assistant announced from the doorway. Tell him I'm busy, Michael replied without looking away from the window. He insists it's urgent. He says it's about the internal investigation. Michael sighed. Since his return, he had begun to document the irregularities he had discovered before his accident. He knew Richard was behind the attack that almost cost him his life. But he needed concrete evidence. Show him in. Richard entered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Cousin, I'm glad to see you recovered. You gave us a terrible scare with your disappearance. Spare me the act, Richard. Michael cut him off coldly. We both know you're not exactly devastated by my return. I don't know what you're talking about. Richard feigned confusion. We've been desperately looking for you. Really? Even after sending those thugs to persuade me to abandon the investigation into the collapse of the Manchester building? A flicker of alarm crossed Richard's eyes, but his smile remained intact. Your amnesia must have affected more than just your memory, cousin. You're delirious. My memory is perfectly recovered, Michael lied, including the details about how you altered the structural blueprints to save costs at the expense of 3 lives. Richard approached, lowering his voice. Be careful what you imply, Michael. False accusations can ruin reputations and lives. Is that a threat? A friendly warning, Richard replied, heading for the door. Take a vacation, Michael. Stress is clearly affecting you. When he was alone, Michael slammed his fist on the desk in frustration. He didn't have the proof he needed. The original documents had disappeared from his office during his absence. Meanwhile, at St. Peter's Hospital, Eleanor was facing her own difficulties. Her colleagues had discovered that she had hosted Michael Sterling in her home, and rumors were multiplying. Is it true you had a romance with the missing millionaire? A nurse asked during lunch. It wasn't like that, Eleanor replied, tired of explaining. I just helped someone who needed support. I didn't know who he really was. Danielle squeezed her hand under the table in a gesture of support. Leave her alone. Eleanor did what any decent person would do. Alexander approached their table with a serious expression. Eleanor, we have a new patient. Construction worker. He suffered an accident at a Sterling Group site. The man, John Smith, had fallen from an improvised scaffolding. His injuries were severe, multiple fractures, head trauma, and spinal cord damage. As Eleanor attended to him, she couldn't help but feel a painful irony. This man had been injured working for the very company Michael managed. "My family?" John murmured when he regained consciousness. "Who will take care of them? We don't have full insurance?" John's case tormented Eleanor for days. Medical bills accumulated, and the company had only offered minimal compensation. After much hesitation, Eleanor made a decision. She dialed the number she had found online for the Sterling Group offices. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Michael Sterling," she said firmly. "Tell him Eleanor Vance is calling." To her surprise, Michael agreed to meet her that same afternoon at a neutral cafe. The tension was palpable when they sat facing each other. "You look well," she finally said, breaking the awkward silence. "Very different in a suit. And without blood on my clothes," he tried to joke, but his smile faded at Eleanor's serious expression. "I owe you an apology for leaving like that. You don't owe me anything, Michael. You weren't yourself, literally. I was myself in essence," he replied sincerely. "Amnesia didn't change my values. It just hid my circumstances." Eleanor nervously played with her coffee cup. "Why did you agree to see me?" "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you," Michael confessed. "About all of you. The weeks at your house were the most authentic I've lived in years." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but distrust prevailed. "I didn't come to talk about that," she finally said. "I have a patient, John Smith. He worked for your company until he suffered a serious accident. His family faces ruin due to medical expenses, and the company only offers miserable compensation." Michael frowned. "I wasn't aware. Give me the details, and I'll make sure he receives all the necessary support." "Just like that?" Eleanor asked, skeptically. "Just like that," Michael confirmed. "Contrary to what you might think, I'm not a corporate monster, Eleanor. I was investigating irregularities in the company just before I was attacked. There are corrupt practices that put workers at risk, and I'm determined to eradicate them." Eleanor studied him carefully, looking for signs of deceit. "Is that why they attacked you? Who did it?" "My cousin Richard. He's behind the safety cuts and the material fraud. Unfortunately, I can't prove it yet. The documents I had disappeared while I was with you." Just as the conversation began to flow, the cafe screens showed an urgent news bulletin. Michael's face appeared alongside alarming headlines. "Sterling Heir investigated for embezzlement and criminal negligence." "Looks like Richard got ahead of me," Michael murmured bitterly. "He's diverting attention to me." "What are you going to do?" Eleanor asked, genuinely concerned. "Clear my name and expose the truth. But without the original documents, it will be my word against his." Eleanor suddenly remembered something. During one of their late-night conversations, when Michael was still struggling with memory fragments, he had mentioned a safe place. "What if the documents weren't in your office?" Eleanor suggested. "During your amnesia, you mentioned something about hidden evidence in a place only you could find." Michael's eyes lit up with recognition. "My grandfather's house in Peak District," he murmured. "Of course I hid them there. No one would associate that abandoned place with me." Michael's enthusiasm quickly faded. "But I can't go alone. Richard probably has people watching me now." Eleanor hesitated for a moment. Every self-preservation instinct screamed at her to stay away from this problem. But then she thought of John Smith and other workers like him, victims of corporate greed. "I'll help you," she finally said. "And I know someone else who might be useful." "Who?" "My brother Matthew. He's a civil engineering student. If those documents contain blueprints or technical specifications, he'll be able to understand them." Michael looked at her with astonishment and gratitude. "Why would you help me after how I left you?" Eleanor reflected for a moment before answering. "Because I believe the person I knew as Martin is still there, inside the millionaire Michael Sterling. And because it's the right thing to do." Leaving the cafe, they didn't notice the figure watching them from a parked car, nor how he took out his phone to make a call. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, "your cousin just met with a woman. Looks like they're planning something." On the other end of the line, Richard Sterling smiled. "Follow them, and this time, make sure you finish the job properly." Night fell over London as Eleanor, Michael, and Matthew began their journey to the Peak District. The plan was risky but simple. Get to Michael's grandfather's old house, retrieve the hidden documents, and return before dawn. "Are you sure no one knows this place?" Matthew asked from the back seat of Eleanor's modest car. Michael, unrecognizable in a cap and dark glasses, nodded. "My paternal grandfather was considered the black sheep of the family. No one visited his house, and after his death, everyone forgot its existence. Except me." Eleanor drove in silence, still processing the situation. Just weeks ago, she was treating an injured stranger in the rain. Now she was helping that same man, a millionaire, recover evidence of corporate corruption. "Eleanor, can you still turn back and forget all about this?" Michael said, noticing her tension. "I don't want to put you in danger." "I've made my decision," she replied firmly. "Besides, if what you say is true, lives are at stake." Matthew examined some blueprints on his tablet. "If these documents prove they altered the structural designs, it will be obvious to any engineer. They won't be able to hide it." The journey continued on secondary roads to avoid detection. Michael had insisted on taking precautions. Phones off, alternative routes, Eleanor's car instead of a more conspicuous vehicle. "I find it hard to believe your own cousin tried to kill you," Eleanor commented, breaking a long silence. "Richard always envied me," Michael explained. "My uncle, his father, was a minority partner in the company. When my father died, I inherited majority control. Richard never accepted it. And the buildings, was it just for greed? Greed and excessive ambition. He wanted to prove he could cut costs and increase profits. When the Manchester building collapsed, killing 3 workers, I discovered he had altered the original blueprints, reducing materials and suppressing safety measures." Matthew interjected from the back. "If you had proof, why didn't you hand it over to the authorities immediately?" Michael sighed. "Because they involved more people, including government officials, who approved permits without proper supervision. I wanted to build a solid case before exposing everything." After 2 hours of driving, they arrived at the outskirts of the Peak District. Michael's grandfather's house turned out to be an old colonial-style building, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. "It hasn't changed," Michael murmured nostalgically. "I spent many summers here as a child, listening to my grandfather's stories about traditional architecture." They entered cautiously. The interior was dusty but intact, as if time had stood still. Michael guided them to the study, where an old oak desk dominated the room. "It must be here," he said, searching for a hidden mechanism under the desk. "My grandfather was a fanatic for secret compartments." After several minutes of frustration, it was Eleanor who noticed something. "These books are arranged strangely." She pointed to a bookshelf where several volumes of architecture formed an unusual pattern, as if they follow a code. Michael approached and smiled. "Of course, the books my grandfather taught me about." He manipulated several volumes in sequence, and a click revealed a hidden compartment. "Here they are!" He pulled out a sealed folder. Inside, original blueprints of the Manchester building with Richard's annotations, printed emails discussing safety cuts, and photographs of meetings with bribed officials. Matthew reviewed the technical documents with an expert eye. "This is indisputable. They reduced the steel reinforcement by 40% in the main columns. With the projected load, collapse was a matter of time." Michael carefully put everything away. "With this, we can stop not only Richard, but prevent future tragedies." And they were so focused that they didn't hear the car stopping outside. "We have company," Eleanor whispered, looking out the window. 2 men. They look like security guards. How did they find us? Michael murmured, paling. Matthew checked his phone. Damn it! My GPS automatically reactivated. They must have tracked my location. There's a back exit, Michael indicated. It leads to a path that connects to the secondary road. They moved silently towards the back of the house. Eleanor carried the folder with the documents while Michael led the way. They managed to get out just as the men forced the main entrance. The path was dark and slippery from the humidity. They moved as fast as possible through the vegetation. The car is too far, Matthew gasped. They'll catch us first. I know a shortcut, Michael replied. This way. He led them through a narrow passage between 2 properties. Behind them, they heard the voices of their pursuers approaching. The folder is falling apart, Eleanor exclaimed, when the humidity started to affect the paper. Take photos, Matthew suggested. Quick! Eleanor took out her phone and frantically photographed every document as they ran. When she finished, Michael took the originals. I'll distract them. You 2 keep going to the car. No, Eleanor protested. It's too dangerous. Trust me, Michael insisted. I know this place like the back of my hand. I'll meet you where we left the car. Before they could object, Michael veered in another direction, taking the folder with him. The men, seeing him, immediately followed him. Eleanor and Matthew continued until they reached the road. The car was where they had left it, but there were no signs of Michael. We can't wait for him here, Matthew said, looking nervously around. It's too exposed. 5 minutes, Eleanor pleaded. Just 5 minutes! 4 minutes later, Michael emerged from the darkness, breathless and his clothes torn, but unharmed. Go, he shouted as he threw himself into the back seat. I managed to lose them, but not for long. Eleanor accelerated onto the secondary road. In the rearview mirror, she saw 2 headlights approaching quickly. They're following us. Michael reviewed the photos on Eleanor's phone. The images aren't perfect, but the essentials are clear, and I still have some originals. He pulled out 3 documents he had hidden in his shirt, the most important ones. The pursuing car approached dangerously. Matthew, checking the map on his phone, found a solution. There's a detour 2 miles ahead. It leads to a constantly busy restaurant area. They won't dare follow us with witnesses around. Eleanor took the indicated detour, and just as Matthew predicted, they emerged into a brightly lit tourist area full of people. Their pursuers slowed down and finally turned around, driving away. When they finally reached the city, it was already dawn. Eleanor stopped the car in a public parking lot. Now what? She asked, exhausted, but alert. Now we counterattack, Michael replied with determination. Tomorrow there's a board of directors meeting. I'll present this evidence to all the shareholders. Richard won't be able to hide any longer. What if he tries something before? Matthew asked. He won't, Michael assured him. His strategy is to publicly discredit me. A direct attack would raise too many suspicions. They parted ways at dawn. Michael returned to his penthouse to prepare for the next day's confrontation, while Eleanor and Matthew returned home, where Martha was waiting, worried. My dear, the old woman said, hugging Eleanor, I don't like seeing you involved in dangerous matters. I had to, Grandma. It's the right thing to do. That night, as she tried to sleep, Eleanor received a message from Michael. Thank you for trusting me when no one else did. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll never forget what you and your family did for me. Eleanor looked at the screen for a long time before replying. Be careful tomorrow, and remember that the man we knew as Martin is as valuable as the businessman Michael Sterling. The next day, as she attended to her patients at the hospital, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Michael facing his cousin and the board of directors. Would he be okay? Would the evidence succeed in thwarting Richard's plans? Alexander found her distracted during his rounds. You haven't heard a word I said, have you? He asked, with a mix of concern and irritation. I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired. It has to do with Sterling, doesn't it? Alexander lowered his voice. Eleanor, please tell me you're not involved in his legal problems. I can't stand by if I can help bring justice. Always the same noble heart, Alexander sighed. Just be careful. People with power play by different rules. Eleanor smiled, grateful for his concern. Despite their complicated past, Alexander remained a good friend. Later, Matthew called her with news. The confrontation at Sterling Group had begun. Financial channels reported an extraordinary board meeting, closed to the press. Eleanor held her breath, waiting for news, unable to concentrate on her work. Finally, her phone vibrated with a message from Michael. Victory. Richard confessed when I presented the evidence. The police are escorting him out of the building right now. I'll call you later. A wave of relief washed over her. Against all odds, they had managed to expose the truth. Workers like John Smith could get justice. What Eleanor didn't know was that the story was only just beginning its most surprising chapter. The boardroom of the Sterling Group had never witnessed such absolute silence. 20 pairs of eyes looked alternately at Michael and Richard, like spectators at a Wild West duel. Shareholders, Michael began in a firm voice, I have called you today to present evidence of criminal conduct that has jeopardized not only our company's reputation, but the lives of our workers. Richard smiled disdainfully from the other end of the table. My cousin has been under a lot of stress lately. His recent episode of amnesia seems to have affected his judgment. Michael unfolded the original documents on the table, along with printouts of the photographs taken by Eleanor. These are the original blueprints for the Manchester building, approved by inspectors, he explained, pointing to a set of documents. And these are the illegally modified blueprints, where the structural reinforcement was reduced by 40% to save costs. A murmur ran through the room as the documents circulated among those present. This is a fabrication, Richard protested, though his face had lost color. Michael is trying to divert attention from his own negligence. Michael then projected the emails onto the room's screen. These messages, sent from your corporate account, Richard, specifically order the changes in materials, and these receipts show the bribes to inspectors to approve the modifications. The murmur turned into exclamations of surprise and indignation. Richard suddenly stood up. You can't believe these manipulated documents. I've been the one keeping this company afloat while my cousin played the philanthropist. An elderly shareholder who had worked with Michael's father spoke up. Can you explain then why you ordered an attack against your cousin when he discovered these irregularities? That's absurd, Richard exclaimed, but his gaze betrayed panic. I have testimonies from the men you hired, Michael continued. When they saw their names in the news about my disappearance, they decided to protect themselves. They confessed that you paid them to teach me a lesson, although the result was more serious than planned. The door to the room opened, and 2 police officers entered, accompanied by the company's lawyer. Richard Sterling, one of the officers said, you are under arrest for attempted murder, corporate fraud, and bribing public officials. What followed was controlled chaos. Richard, as he was being handcuffed, looked at Michael with hatred. This isn't over, cousin. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. The shareholders, stunned by the events, unanimously approved Richard's dismissal and reinstated Michael as CEO with full powers to implement reforms. A few hours later, Michael called Eleanor to tell her what had happened. I can't believe it actually worked, she said, relieved. What happens now? Justice, I hope, and deep changes in the company, Michael replied. I want to create a compensation fund for the families affected by the building collapse and establish new safety standards for all our constructions. Sounds like something Martin would do, Eleanor commented, with a smile he couldn't see, but could feel. "Martin and Michael are the same person," he replied. "Only now I have the resources to make those ideals we discussed in your kitchen a reality." The conversation was interrupted when Eleanor had to attend an emergency. 2 weeks had passed since the adventure in the Peak District, and although they communicated daily, both had returned to their respective lives. One Saturday morning, Eleanor received a formal invitation from Sterling Group to attend an event at St. Peter's Hospital. Upon arriving, she was surprised to see a podium set up in the main lobby and several journalists gathered. Alexander approached her, as confused as she was. "Do you know what's happening? Management just said it was an important announcement." Before Eleanor could reply, Michael Sterling appeared, impeccable in a navy blue suit. Their gazes met briefly before he took position at the podium. "Good morning, everyone," Michael began. "Today, I have the honor of announcing that the Sterling Foundation has established a funding program for community clinics in underserved areas. The first of these clinics will be built in Greenwood, a town 2 hours from London." Camera flashes illuminated Michael's face as he detailed the project. Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. Greenwood was her hometown, the place where she had always dreamed of establishing a clinic. "This project," Michael continued, "will be led by an exceptional professional whose dedication and humanity represent the values we want to promote. Dr. Eleanor Vance will be the medical director of this first clinic." The room erupted in applause as Eleanor remained paralyzed by surprise. Danielle gently pushed her towards the podium. "Go, Eleanor! This is your moment!" With trembling legs, Eleanor approached Michael, who extended his hand with a smile. "Do you accept the challenge?" he asked softly when she reached his side. "I can't believe you remembered that dream," Eleanor replied, emotional. "I told you about it one night while we were cooking with my grandmother. I remember every conversation we had," Michael assured her. The press conference continued with questions about the project details. Eleanor, regaining her composure, spoke passionately about the medical needs of rural communities and her plans for the clinic. Among the audience, a silent figure observed the scene with an enigmatic smile. Martha, who had insisted on attending the event, murmured to herself as if confirming an old hunch. When the presentation ended and the journalists began to disperse, the elderly woman approached Michael and Eleanor, who were talking animatedly. "Young man," Martha said to Michael, "there's something I must confess to you, something I've kept for many years." "What are you talking about, Grandma?" Eleanor asked, confused. Martha took an old black and white photograph from her purse. "Do you recognize this man?" she asked, showing it to Michael. Michael studied the image. A group of construction workers posing in front of a construction site, dated 20 years ago. His expression changed as he recognized his father among them. "It's my father," he said, surprised. "How do you have this photo?" "Because the man next to him," Martha pointed to a smiling young worker, "is my son-in-law, Eleanor's father. He worked briefly for Sterling Constructions before his accident." Eleanor took the photograph with trembling hands. "My father worked for Michael's company?" "Not only that," Martha continued. "When the accident happened, your father didn't have full insurance. We were desperate, with 2 young children and no resources. One day, I received a visit from Mr. Sterling Sr. Although he wasn't legally responsible, he felt morally obligated. He established an anonymous trust fund that paid for your nursing studies and Matthew's university education now." Michael and Eleanor looked at each other, stunned, trying to process this revelation. "My father never told me about this," Michael murmured. "He was a discreet man in his generosity," Martha explained. "He only asked that I never tell you where the money came from, so you could grow up without feeling debt or obligation." "So, when you found me in the rain," Michael began, Fate completed a circle that began 20 years ago, Martha concluded serenely. Some connections are written in the stars, children. The silence that followed was laden with emotions. Eleanor remembered the nights she wondered how her grandmother managed to pay for her studies with her modest pension. Michael thought of his father, whose memory now shone with a new dimension of nobility. I always felt like I knew you from somewhere, Eleanor finally confessed. Something about the way you spoke, your gestures. Perhaps our souls recognized each other, Michael replied, gently taking her hand, before our minds did. Martha watched the exchange with satisfaction. Her granddaughter, who had dedicated her life to caring for others, was finally finding someone willing to care for her. Alexander, who had overheard the entire conversation, approached Eleanor with a serene expression. Looks like you were right about him after all, he admitted with a melancholic smile. I'm happy for you, Eleanor. Really. As the guests dispersed, Michael and Eleanor remained in the lobby, processing the extraordinary revelation they had just received. Their lives, seemingly so distant, had been intertwined long before that rainy night in front of St. Peter's Hospital. Do you believe in destiny? Michael asked in a low voice. I believe in the decisions that lead us where we're meant to be, Eleanor replied. And I believe that saving you that night was the best decision I've ever made. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and promises. A clinic to build, a company to transform, and a love story that, as they now knew, had begun long before their first encounter. A year had passed since the day Martha revealed the surprising connection between Eleanor and Michael. A connection that dated back 2 decades, when their fathers coincided on a construction site, never imagining that their children would be destined to meet. The main square of Greenwood sparkled under the afternoon sun. Garlands of flowers and lights decorated the trees, while the town's inhabitants gathered for the most anticipated celebration of the year, the wedding of their beloved daughter, Eleanor Vance, to Michael Sterling. Eleanor watched the preparations from her bedroom window in her grandparents' house. Her white dress, simple but elegant, hung ready by the mirror. Nervous? Danielle asked, adjusting the final details of Eleanor's hairstyle. Curiously, no, she replied with a serene smile. It feels like the most natural step in the world. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes. The Greenwood Community Clinic had opened its doors 6 months ago, fulfilling Eleanor's dream of bringing quality medical care to her hometown. Although she directed the clinic, Eleanor continued to work some shifts at St. Peter's Hospital, refusing to completely abandon her original vocation. Michael, for his part, had transformed Sterling Group. He established new safety standards that exceeded official regulations, created an affordable housing program in marginalized areas, and worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the previous management. The case against Richard had resulted in a severe sentence, not only for the attack on Michael, but for the criminal negligence that caused the death of 3 workers. The victims' families received fair compensation and scholarships for the orphaned children. You know, Danielle commented while adjusting the veil, I never believed in fairy tales, but you two are the closest thing I've seen. Eleanor laughed softly. It hasn't exactly been a fairy tale. We've had our challenges. It was true. The integration of their worlds had not been easy. Michael's wealthy friends initially looked down on Eleanor. The Hampstead neighbors were suspicious of the millionaire's intentions. Both had to defend their relationship on multiple fronts, but each obstacle only strengthened their bond. Michael learned to value the authenticity of simple relationships. Eleanor discovered that privilege, when used responsibly, can be a powerful tool for social change. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Matthew, elegant in his best man's suit. It's time, sis, he announced with a smile. Everyone's waiting. In the center of the square, under an arch of white flowers, Michael waited by a small altar. The entire community of Greenwood filled the chairs arranged in a semicircle, blending in perfect harmony with Sterling Group executives and St. Peter's Hospital staff. Martha, radiant in a turquoise dress, occupied the place of honor in the front row. At 71, her energy seemed multiplied by the happiness of seeing her granddaughter not only achieve her professional dreams, but also find true love. When Eleanor appeared on Matthew's arm, a murmur of admiration rippled through the square. Her natural beauty, enhanced by the happiness she radiated, captivated all eyes, but especially Michael's. To the surprise of many, it was Alexander who officiated the ceremony. Over time, he had accepted that his story with Eleanor had ended, and now he sincerely celebrated her happiness. "We are gathered to unite Eleanor and Michael, two people whom fate connected in the most unexpected ways," Alexander began. "First through their fathers, then through a rainy night in front of a hospital, and finally, through the shared courage to do the right thing, even in the face of adversity." Their vows were simple, but profound. Both promised to honor not only their love, but the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. "When I found you that night in the rain," Eleanor said, her voice firm despite her emotion, "I didn't know I was picking up the pieces of my own destiny, and I didn't know that by losing my memory, I would find the most authentic part of myself," Michael replied, "the part you saw when no one else could." After the exchange of rings and the traditional kiss, the celebration began. Long tables set up in the square were filled with traditional dishes, prepared by the town's women, alongside gourmet delicacies contributed by Michael's personal chef. Mariachi music blended with laughter and conversations. During the party, Martha danced joyfully with the director of St. Peter's Hospital, proving that you're never too old to celebrate life. Matthew, now graduated with honors in civil engineering, enthusiastically explained his new position in Sterling Group's Community Development Division to some investors. Even Alexander, after toasting generously to the couple's happiness, chatted animatedly with a young pediatrician newly arrived at the hospital. As night fell, Michael led Eleanor to a quiet corner of the square. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When Eleanor opened it, she found a miniature of the photograph Martha had shown them a year ago. Their fathers together at that construction site, smiling at the camera, unaware they were sowing the seeds of a love story. "So we never forget that our journey began long before we knew each other," Michael explained. Eleanor, with tears of happiness, hugged him under the starry Greenwood sky. "You know what's the most beautiful thing about all this?" she murmured against his chest. "What?" "That our story is just beginning." A gentle shower began to fall, reminding them of their first encounter. But this time, instead of seeking shelter, they remained in the rain, dancing slowly as the drops mingled with their tears of joy. "I think the rain follows us," Michael joked. "Or perhaps it blesses us," Eleanor replied. After all, it was in the rain that a humble nurse saved a millionaire, unaware that destiny had been bringing them together for 20 years. Around them, guests ran for cover, but they continued dancing, drenched and happy, proving that true love knows no boundaries of social class, circumstance, or time. A love that, like theirs, was written in the stars long before its protagonists even dreamed of meeting. What part of Eleanor and Michael's incredible journey resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.